Another wipe, another opportunity to rub my face in barbed wire. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a new skills optimization video, otherwise known as cheesing. We're going to try to do this in somewhat of a logical order rather than the list in the skills menu that you see in game. So we're going to start with sniper because this is the first one that you run into because you need level 3 for Tarkov Shooter 4. To get skill points into the sniper skill, you must be using a weapon that is listed under the bolt action rifles heading on the flea market. This includes the AXMC, the DVL, the VPO-215, any of the Mosins including the short one, the Orsis T5000, the Remington M700 and the SV98. Of these, because they're cheap, either the VPO-215 or one of the Mosins is normally favoured for completing this, and the way that you actually get skill points using the weapon is you either get hits or you have to reload the gun. This is where the notorious reloading the Mosin over and over again thing comes from to cheese this, and people often will bring in a Mosin with them into raid alongside their regular gun, reload it 20 times at the beginning and then throw it into a bush with insurance and get it back later to continue doing it another time. Despite some misconception in the community, it does work reloading the actual magazine driven bolt actions like the VPO-215, but the skill points that you get per action are much lower than reloading the bolt actions like the Mosin, which is the reason why that method is favoured. I went and tested this quickly just to get updated numbers, and using the VPO you get 0.5 skill points for 20 reloads, whereas with the Mosin, if you reload that 20 times with 20 individual bullets, you get 1.3 instead, so it's about 2.5 times more efficient using the Mosin than the VPO. So as we said with this, you kind of have two options. You either use the bolt action rifles a lot and get lots of individual hits with them, or you just reload them over and over again until you hit diminishing returns for the skills. With that last option, you kind of have two options there as well. One either being that you just utilize the fact that there's no diminishing returns and actually there's a small boost when you enter a raid in the first place, use that up and then throw it in a bush to get it back in insurance later, or you utilize the mechanism of all skills with diminishing returns to get multiple cycles out of it during an individual raid. Once diminishing returns has kicked in, i.e. there's a little red down arrow over the skill and it says that leveling is only giving you 60% of experience, this is the point where you should stop. But what you can do from here is you can wait an actual 5 minutes and your diminishing returns will reset not to the original 129% from the start of the raid, but it will reset back to 100%, so it's at least somewhat efficient. The problem with this method of waiting is that firstly you have to carry the bolt action with you through the raid until you get there, and secondly that you have to measure it yourself because the little down arrow never goes away even after the 5-minute period is up. If you gain any experience in that skill point, in this particular situation sniper, then you reset the timer back to 5 minutes, but you'll never know because it doesn't show you anywhere. If however instead you time it yourself and you wait until 5 minutes and 1 second for example, and then you do one more reload, you'll see that the little down arrow has gone away if you've done it correctly. This is how you know that you've got back to 100% and you're not under diminishing returns anymore. This is pretty much the same for every skill in the game, and some of them do have a shorter cycle time than 5 minutes, but I haven't done a deep dive on exactly which one, and if you just stick with 5 minutes, this works for every single skill for sure. So now that we know how to level sniper, let's move on to the next critical pinch point, which is vitality. You need vitality level 3 for the med station level 3 to be able to upgrade it, as well as being therapist 3, along with a LEDX and an ophthalmoscope, but the vitality 3 for me is something that I get stuck on every single wipe. This seems to heavily depend on how you play the game. I hear people all the time saying that they can't believe that I always get stuck on this because they get it at level 4 or something every time they reach it, but for me I just tend not to get hit that much in the early wipe, and when I do I normally die instantly. The people who level up a lot of their vitality skill tend to be those people who end up fighting scavs a lot and get shot a bunch and have to heal themselves up from 1 HP, that kind of thing, which just doesn't happen to me all that often. That aside, how exactly do we level up vitality then? Well, vitality itself levels up when you take damage. So you can take any kind of damage and this will level your vitality skill and give you experience points. I've tried multiple ways of doing it, and for me I just find the barbed wire method the easiest. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to shoreline, and depending on where you spawn, you're going to either go towards this area up by the tunnel, or you're going to go this area down by the railway. The tunnel area is a bit more dangerous because people do actually go through there, whereas the railway side you can go behind the train and it's very unlikely that anyone's going to see you, especially if you go at night. You're going to want to take a lot of meds with you, probably an entirely full grizzly in your secure container, along with maybe a couple of AFACs or IFACs, whatever you can spare the money on. Then you're going to rub yourself on barbed wire and heal yourself repeatedly until you hit the 60% skill diminishing returns debuff. From here you can just hide yourself away somewhere and set a timer from the last point of damage that you took, wait for 5 minutes and go and do something else useful in your life, and then come back and start the process all over again with 100% skills resetting your diminishing returns. I did this on stream with a bunch of meds, and we basically went up 4 skill points in one particular raid. Yes, that did take half an hour to do, so it is a bit of a pain, but usually by the time that you need Vitality 3, I'm normally about level 2 and a bit, so it doesn't take that much longer to get into Vitality 3 if you do this a couple of times. Next, I want to talk about endurance and strength. These aren't needed for any particular quest, but they do have some of the biggest effects on the actual game, and they are levelable for the average player. If you want to know the exact specifics about each skill, you can go and check that out on the wiki, but primarily endurance affects the amount of stamina that you have, and strength affects your carry weight and your PMC speed. Leveling these two purely depends on your PMC's weight mode, so to speak. If the weight is in white, that means you're leveling endurance. If the weight is in yellow, or I guess red, then you're leveling strength. Because diminishing returns for skills applies to strength and endurance just the same as it does for every other skill, in an ideal world, what you do is going to raid very slightly overweight. You'd run out a full stamina bar to get a lot of strength experience, and then drop some tiny little inconsequential item that you've brought with you, like some shotgun shells for example. You then run around on the endurance mode for 5 minutes, and by the time that you've done that, you then pick up your first piece of loot and puts you overweight again, allowing you to gain strength XP at the full value rather than diminishing returns value. At the end of the raid, you drop enough stuff to go underweight again, and because it was 5 minutes since you last leveled endurance, you can then run out a full stamina bar and gain endurance XP at 100% again. Now, practically speaking, this doesn't often work out this way. You end up either going into raid underweight, picking up your first bits of loot, and then being overweight for the entire rest of the raid. I'm also usually not courageous enough to drop all my stuff and run around by the extract, but if you really want to min-max your skills, that's how. The next skill is health. This doesn't really count because this is a combination of 3 other skills. You get half a point for every point of XP in endurance, strength, and vitality. So level those 3 and you'll level health. A semi-related skill is stress resistance that you do need for a quest later called Flint from Jaeger, and you do get skill points for this according to the wiki for being on low health points, but I don't know where the threshold for this is. You do get 0.33 points though for having the pain debuff, i.e. breaking your legs. Next, let's talk about metabolism, because this is the skill that people usually max first if you're going to max any. Metabolism is very easy to level. This again has the 5-minute diminishing return, so try not to eat or drink after you've just eaten or drank something else. The diminishing returns on metabolism kicks in really fast, so you can only drink about 5 or 6 units out of a bottle of water, for example, before maxing that skill out and having to wait 5 minutes to level it again. Use this to your advantage by eating and drinking 5 minutes apart from each other. Just try not to eat or drink back to back and you should be good to go and level this skill really fast. Given this is the easiest skill to max, it is well worth optimizing it, because if you get to the max level for it, you don't receive any damage anymore if you run out of food or water, which is pretty cool. Next up, we have a whole grouping of skills broadly to do with looting. We have perception, attention, search, intellect, and charisma. With perception, you just have to pick up loot to level it. This increases your hearing distance and also your loot dot distance, i.e. that little white dot that comes up when items are near the center of your screen. Attention levels by uncovering loot in loot containers, and you get 0.1 skill points per item. This increases your looting speed and is the one that at elite gives you a 50% chance to instantly search a container, which is pretty awesome. Search skill is very similar, you just have to search loot containers and corpses, so this levels naturally over time. These skills are why you see experienced players go up to their scav kills and loot through every single container slot on them and take every item onto their PMC's body, even if they didn't actually want them. Often people will take the item off the scav and then just drop it straight onto the floor, but this gives you perception, so it's definitely worth doing. I've also included intellect in this category, even though it's not quite the same, and this one levels when you craft, repair, or examine, but the reason for this is that you get charisma points for every point you gain in attention, intellect, or perception. This is very similar to health, you get half a point for each one that you get in those 3 categories. Memory is another one of these compound skills that is needed for the library, and this is gained when you gain XP in any of the physical or practical skills, which you can check in the little drop down in the skills menu. Next up, let's talk about immunity. This is an interesting skill because what this does is this reduces the negative effects of stims from 1% up to 50% when you get it to elite. But the reason that people like this is if you can get it to elite level, you have a 55% chance to completely ignore the downsides of certain stimulants. This has proved very useful in certain events, such as the one where a doll boss gave you plus 1000% damage because you could go into raid, stick it in your arm, see if you actually got the debuff or not, and if you did, you just leave the raid, and if you didn't, you just carry on as normal. This makes certain stims really powerful as well because you have a chance to ignore all of the downsides, but it's incredibly hard to level. To get skill points in immunity, you need to survive a debuff that has a timed duration. This means that you're either taking a stim or eating a food with a negative effect, normally on skills, but it can work with water and hydration too, so long as it lasts over a certain period of time. The two most popular items for leveling this is either Pevco or Max Energy. These have very small stat debuffs, but when they end you gain experience points into immunity, which allows you to level the skill. As I said, it's very slow, so you have to be doing this pretty much from the start of the wipe if you want to have any chance of maxing it. Next, let's talk about weapon skills. This works exactly the same as Sniper because that is a weapon skill, and to level this you either have to get hits with that weapon class or reload with that weapon class. This slowly improves your reload speed, the switch speed with those guns, the recoil of those weapons, and the ergo, but it levels quite slowly. If you do want to give it a little boost, just keep reloading your magazine as you're walking around the map to gain some extra points. Recoil control is similar, except this only affects horizontal spread as opposed to overall recoil like the weapon skill does. You level this by shooting with any gun. Aim drills is leveled by getting hits whilst in ADS, and troubleshooting by clearing malfunctions, but these two level really slowly and are also not that useful. Surgery is a useful skill on the other hand, but it is quite laborious to cheese. You get 1.1 XP every time you use a CMS or a Serve 12 on a blacked out limb. But the reason why this is good is that a CMS kit can sometimes only give 25% of the HP back to that particular limb. As you level up through surgery, this decreases the penalty of the max HP remaining, which is very strong. Covert movement reduces the sound that you make, which is obviously very useful, and increases the speed at which you walk while you're in sneak mode, also quite useful. To level this, you want to get your speed all the way down so that the speaker icon has no volume showing at all. It's about the third notch up, and then just walk for probably about a minute. Do this in every raid and your covert movement will go up. Mag drills, technically you unpack and repack mags to make this go up. This takes an absolute eternity. You can check magazines as well in the specific gun for the remaining ammo, which is why sometimes you see people checking them over and over again, but this one just takes so long to level, it's just not worth worrying about. Light armor, heavy armor, and weapon maintenance are relatively new additions to the game, which relate to the repairing of light and heavy armors and also to guns. Usually the best part about these skills is stopping the durability from decreasing quite as much when you repair something. If you can get them to elite, you have a 50% chance of not reducing the durability at all, which is actually really amazing. While you do get some experience for taking damage with either light or heavy armors, most of your experience skill points are going to come from repairing those armors using repair kits. This only works with repair kits and not with repairing via the traders, so you have to buy these kits or find them in raid to make use of this skill. Getting to level 10 in any three of these skills will allow you to apply enhancements to those particular weapons and armors when you repair them. This shows up on the item as a kind of gold overlay with a little icon in the corner, but to be honest with you, I pretty much ignore this feature in its entirety. It's mostly useless for weapons as it only reduces weapon spread, which we don't really care about, and reduces malfunction chance, which we also don't really care about. With vests, there's a sliding scale of reduction of incoming damage from 2% all the way up to 20% at elite, so it really only matters at the elite skill level because down at the lower tiers, 6% or 5% damage reduction normally doesn't actually mean the difference between life or death when getting hit in the thorax with various ammo. There are some situations where yes, this might breakpoint some very specific thing, but for the most part it's not going to make any difference. The two final skills that we need to talk about are the hideout skills, crafting and hideout management. Crafting has a relatively complicated set of rules, so to boil it down, what you're going to want to do is pick the shortest crafts and alternate between two of them while you're at the computer, and pick the longest craft that's going to be finished by the time you get back when you're away. The idea behind this is that you get XP for finishing a craft if it wasn't a duplicate, and also XP for the amount of time the craft took. This is heavily skewed in favour of finishing crafts, so you want to pick short crafts and cycle between them and pick long crafts while you're not there. Hideout management also gives you points when you craft, but you also get points into hideout management when you spend resources, i.e. fuel or something like the air filter. This is the reason why you see people running the air filter all the time even when they're not in raid, because they're trying to level their hideout management. Hideout management will slowly reduce the amount of fuel, air and water filters that you use whilst in the hideout, so it can be well worth the investment. So with that, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.